Okay.
I know I'm there's something that I'm not getting here with morality, but the way I'm looking at it now, I'm still it's more like it just increases the probability of a good life. I know that that that's not what is being claimed. The claim is that it's not about probabilities, but I just can't see it another way. I'm coming at it from this context of like the universe guarantees nothing because it's not a conscious being. And so maybe this is a bit extreme, but can kill you whenever you want. Like you can always miss knowledge, or you can, do something that is virtuous and still not succeed and fail. And so I'm conceptualizing, at least the way I'm seeing it, even though the opposite, this is not what's being claimed, is that it'll just help you increase the probability of living. Um, but I don't know. I can't identify what is the difference between why am I coming at it from that context, and this context doesn't seem to be, from what I've read, it doesn't seem to be saying that. Like, but I'm just not getting it. Other than it's something that increases the probability of success because there's so many unknowns.
Yeah, I wonder why you went to the word probability first to increasing probability. Like, I mean, maybe in a literal sense, you are increasing the probability, but I mean, think of it in terms of a goal, right? The
Right.
goal is to live
Yes.
well, and in some way, you're one, that includes knowledge, coming to understand things, and recognizing what brings you to a state of flourishing, both in terms of biology and psychology, even all those aspects of yourself. So you understand that much for sure, but you seem to be having trouble with when you have uncertain knowledge, when you're not quite sure if, say, a certain diet would be good for your health, or you're not quite sure if a particular career is good for your psychology. Like you might not know, you might never be certain of those decisions. You can only get like, oh, I'm pretty sure I have a good idea that this is true, but I'm not positive. I haven't reached certainty on these things. Would I be right to say that you would have a trouble integrating ideas of like things you aren't certain about that might or might not improve the quality of your life?
Um, well, no, that I do see it that way, where I'm seeing a world as there are too many factors which you cannot know in advance and that you cannot control necessarily. And so if you're talking about morality, because I guess maybe that's more of a metaphysics then, but because there are so many factors that you cannot control in most situations and that you do not know or have knowledge of. Um, well, it's strange to say you do not have knowledge of factors, and because if I didn't have knowledge, I wouldn't be able to say even that. But um, that that to me, morality, the way I'm seeing morality with that in mind is, oh, okay, well, here is something which is supposed to help you live a better life, but it's just a probability, since just because you follow reason doesn't mean you're going to achieve your goal, or just because
Nice.
you um, you know someone steals once doesn't mean they're gonna something
Let me
terrible is gonna
rephrase your
happen to
problem.
them.
I
Yeah.
think I figured it out. What the problem is, at least. Or is it maybe this? That even if you did all the things right according to objectivism, even if you led the ideal life defined doing the right things, living by reason, making good choices, is it possible that, isn't it just possible that your life would be terrible anyway? Isn't there at least a slim chance that nothing actually works out? Because nothing is guaranteed. You're just doing your best, and even doing your best isn't always a guarantee that things will end badly. Is it something
Yeah.
like that, maybe?
Yeah, I know there's some context in there. I can't pinpoint what it is that's like
Yeah.
introducing some different way of thinking, but that's sort of, yeah, that's the direction that whenever I'm reading this, that's how I'm I'm conceptualizing right now, which I know contradicts what is being claimed, but I just can't figure out
Yeah,
where my thinking is.
it's almost like having objectivity and say that there's a 95% chance if you follow these principles, you'll have a good life, but there's a 5% chance it will still end in misery. I mean, it seems like that's the way you're conceptualizing it at the moment.
Yeah, and even with, let's say, principles like, oh, okay, someone who steals or does something bad can still get away with it. It's just because it's a matter of like certain factors being in play, and not having uh, not being able to account for all of them in every moment of our life. And so that, I know there's something wrong in that. I just, like I said, I can't pinpoint what this context is that I'm holding that is different, completely different from this. Um, and I actually, not that I know there's something wrong. I know there's some big difference, but I can't pinpoint the exact, when they talk about like, I just read through some of the art of thinking notes, and he talks about you have to, like, when you're learning a new philosophy, because the concepts are so fundamental, sometimes you'll have all these questions that are coming from an alien context, and you need to be able to recognize when they're from that alien context. So I know this is some alien context. I just don't know what it is that is making me think this way and see it differently, and then what the answer to it would be.
Yeah. Um, the universe guarantees nothing. We can recognize that, but can it kill you whenever it wants? I mean, in the
Well, that
sense that,
expression is just like something,
yeah,
obviously, I actually went through and clarified guarantee, which is a kind of promise. It's
yeah,
made between humans. So I'm tearing it out of context to put it in here.
yeah.
But what I was getting at is
I
that,
knew what
yeah,
you meant. Like it doesn't care about you. It just there's no rhyme or reason necessarily about
right.
why you die. You just do.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and
Well, well, according to objectivism, there is always a reason. You just
yeah,
won't,
there's a
might not be cognizant of it.
yeah. I mean, the universe itself didn't have its own reasons. I mean
Yes.
it like that. Um, but I guess you could say that if you understand how reality operates, then you can avoid or determine the things that might destroy you. I mean, I think maybe to an extent, yeah, you're increasing the probability of flourishing. But I think maybe even a further claim of objectivism probably makes is that the process of living your life is itself a reward. I mean, that well, the problem with that is that can you do all the right things and not attain any happiness? I would think objectivism kind of takes the view that if you do these right things, happiness is necessarily part of that consequence. It doesn't matter necessarily with the merely the consequences, but
I didn't get that from, I got that there are certain conditions, like, so that's why, the chapter on political freedom, there are certain conditions for happiness.
yeah,
And so if they're not in place, it's not possible for you to be happy. Um,
to an extent,
but
yeah. Um,
at least you will have, maybe at least you will, um, you won't be as neurotic, for example, as because you'll know that this is not in the nature of things for life to be like this. So you won't be as tortured as someone else, maybe it's something like that. I don't know. Um,
there probably is an element of probability, but like just say that you're not able to live to the absolute maximum potential for whatever reason might be, whether it's like you live in a well, depending on like the laws of your country might influence the type of quality of life you can attain, or people around you can sometimes forcibly limit that. But I think a lot of it is to do with the things that make it have a greater impact on your quality of life is usually force is one thing, is one of the major things that other people cause the conditions which make it so that you're less able to flourish and less
yeah,
able to live. I guess less able might be equivalent to saying less likely to flourish, because ability implies that there's a range of possibilities of what you can do. You're not always guaranteed what the outcome will be of those. And
I wonder if, sorry, continue. I'll ask you after.
um, so virtue, yeah, it would minimize the risks, but I'm not sure if that's even the right way to think of it. You really just want to think of in terms of just
That's
the
why
flourishing.
I think there's some shift in context, and whenever I think from this context, all my like I was going to ask you before, you said, yeah, like you can do something and you're not guaranteed a certain outcome, but aren't we? Remember there was that I asked you about that. I think it was the reason chapter. He talked about roles and how roles said you don't work to earn your brain, and he gave the
Yeah,
example how like, well, who is who is earning, who is earning and by what means, or like what is earning and by what means, and like what happens when you tear a certain word out of context and put it in another. And so I feel like this might be similar to that. And when I say like nothing is guaranteed, because a guarantee is a promise, and that the whole concept of guarantee obviously comes up in the context of people, two people making and coming to some agreement to take some action in the future contingent on something. And so you're suddenly using that word and you're putting it in the context of like in a different context. But then what, I don't know, what is the mind doing when you're just suddenly saying like, oh, nothing is guaranteed to you. Like obviously not, there's no other person. The universe isn't a person. Aren't you? Isn't it similar to when someone asks like, well, what is the cause of the universe? When you when
yeah.
you suddenly introduce, there's like the premise of the implicit premise of like there's some consciousness who must have caused it. It has to begin with consciousness. Is it not similar to that when I use that kind of language? And I'm like, oh, nothing is guaranteed, or the universe doesn't guarantee an outcome.
It's hard to say. Can you scroll up a bit? Let me see that
Yeah.
quote you have marked there. None
Oh,
of
okay.
those.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, yeah. Regardless, you may fail or even die.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a mistake, and an honest mistake, and then that you end up dying. Um, I mean, success can be difficult because how are we
Yeah. Even
defining
I think he said.
success?
Wait, did I say this or did he say this? I don't know.
I think you did, but I'm actually not sure. Wait, I don't know. You should
I
check
will
that.
look it up. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up.
Because I don't think there's anything too wrong with probability as long as you understand. It's more like a way of conceptualizing fallibility, but it's not
Uh,
really an essential way to think of it. When you
well,
really want to think of it in terms of like just the quality of flourishing and what brings you flourishing and what doesn't. And then you could weigh it even in terms of things you're not sure about.
yeah, he wrote that virtue minimizes the risks inherent in life.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, and to take this literally, yeah, there is a decreasing probability that you would die. That's in using these principles, you're more likely to flourish than you would otherwise. I guess you could say you could accidentally flourish, which is questionable, but maybe a few people in the world have managed that, or you just had bad luck and, well, I shouldn't say luck, but just the environment you're living in prevents you from flourishing well, or even if it was the best environment possible, you will make mistakes even when you're pursuing the life. The life isn't just merely like, did you rack up enough years? I mean, that's the more difficult thing. I mean, I don't think we're trying to say success is the number of years you rack up necessarily. That we're not, it'd be one thing to avoid all catastrophe and say, I'm never going to fly a plane, never go anywhere. I mean, that's a way to further maximize your chance of survival. But you might want to think in terms of in what ways your psychology affected, in what ways does your, if we just say success is flourishing, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Flourishing has to include additional attributes than, say, years you were alive. We're trying to define in terms of furthering your life, whether psychologically, biologically, all those things that increase they increase the quality of life, the happiness, and success at living. All those things kind of fit together.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Although I don't know, there's something I'm not gonna I don't think I'm gonna figure it out now, but there's something odd, not odd. There's something I need to reconcile with this and like the view of accident or disaster and probability and uncertainty,
Yeah.
because yeah, there's something every time I come to it, that's how I'm thinking of it. But
I'll just add one other thing that when I told you about like cognitive biases and risk management,
yeah,
conceptually, that's so I think it is fine to say that there's an element of risk management in morality that is moral to minimize your chances of failure in important goals.
right.
And that is something relevant to morality. It's not the entire question of morality, but it is a relevant question that is important to have an answer to how you deal with risk, but still need to attain something.
Yeah. Although from what I got, the philosophy will deal with the more like the more fundamental decisions, whether
Right.
conditions required to take certain actions are supposed to always be present, like
Right.
um, being independent. There's no context on earth where that the conditions for that are no longer present, and now you shouldn't exercise that as a virtue. So that's what I got. Whereas risk is um, the concept of risk involves situations where factors which you cannot account for are present. So I do wonder if it is the role of philosophy. Maybe philosophy is just supposed to orient your thinking so certain questions don't even come up. Like there's no such thing as a universe guaranteeing. And like a dog, for example, doesn't worry about, a dog is just living, right? He doesn't worry about when will I go. It's not even a thought. And so
Yeah.
maybe in the same sense, there's some reorientation in thinking you can do where you don't think about it in, there's some perspective I'm coming from, which I think might be omniscience or something. I don't know what it is, but there's
Yes.
something off about it. But I can't figure it out.
Yeah, I think that would come in time. I do think there's an element of like a different standard here that you're using a different standard than just flourishing here. Like
Right.
at least implicitly, that
Yeah.
it's hard to pull out though.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So in the art of thinking, which I looked at the notes, the he gave the example of, he'd go to university and then he'd come back and speak to Ayn Rand on the weekend and she'd tell him existence exists. And he'd be like, well, is that analytic or is that synthetic?
Yeah,
And
that's almost how I feel about some of these questions. Like, I understand your question is fine, but it's like I can understand that there's distinctions you're trying to make think might be relevant, and I say maybe one thing that's simpler, and it is about trying to even simplify, making it easier to understand, easier to hold in your mind. Because I agree your distinctions are relevant, but you might be going further than you need to at this moment. Like Peacock probably was Rand probably say, well, you don't need to differentiate between those two. There's no reason to think it that way. And Peacock probably had a hard time breaking free of that. So
but so there's a couple of interesting things in that. So one is I really like, by the way, that he makes a lot of points to show how much he struggled to get to where he is at. So
Yeah.
he'd say things like that you laugh at, but that's where he began, and you see how he thinks now, and you see the difference. So I like that. And then the second thing is that was part of his discussion on properly handling contexts when you integrate a new philosophy. And so sometimes you will, like, obviously when I'm going through, even when I began, the amount of questions I had was ridiculous. But when I'm going through an essay and when I'm going through something, I am asking questions from my context. Now, the issue is that um, if you come at it from a fundamental context that is false or contradictory, you're going to get stuck, which I do a lot. But it's not necessarily. It's so he's talking about you've got to sometimes put the alien context on hold, but that assumes you can recognize what that context is fundamentally. You can go, oh, this is an empiricist context or an omniscient
Yeah.
context, or but I like with some of these questions, it's not really like how would you even work out what the context is? I don't know. Um, Unless it's maybe you study philosophy more broadly and then but that anyway, any thoughts on working out when you someone asks a question or when you ask a question, how do you work out what the alien context is, if it is an alien context?
Well, what I try to do when interacting with them is at least try to think of it from their perspective, try to actually be in their context from what I know and eliminate what I know I'm reading into it. Like, I can recognize their background, I can recognize their stated beliefs, I can recognize where they went to school, whatever it might be, or where they live. I might be able to understand what they're using, so I might be able to put myself in their position and try to reason out what the implications of their beliefs would be. And that's one
Right.
way to do it. Like, just like take a step in their shoes is the best way to really get into that. And I can work out things I may have gone through is another way I can go from there. Or I can recognize something I've thought about. Like, I've thought about this being more consequentialist way of thinking, that things are just a matter of probabilities, that you can make an equation for moral action that it gives you some output. Like, it increases chances of flourishing by 0.1%. Therefore, do it. Like, I can understand that because there's a kind of precision in that that's appealing, even that if you could make an equation for everything, even if with uncertainties, you would at least know what to do every time. You just pop out, put in the input to the equation, and your answer's right there. But it has to be more than that. Like, it's recognizing that maybe that's a matter of focusing on the concretes too much, or demanding more certainty than you can even have, or it could be a variety of things. And you can only do that by talking to them more. Like, for you, I think it's usually a matter of going for extreme precision, and sometimes that can make you lose the forest or the trees. I think that's something that can happen.
What would be the underlying philosophical premise of that, though? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
because if you identify the root, maybe this is a good example of this precision yet. But if you can, like, if someone asks, well, how is nature so ordered? And this, like, who created the universe? You can assume, okay, so this is the context here is this philosophical context of God. But with someone who's like overly seeking, or in your judgment, let's say overly seeking precision, what what would be the philosophical root to that? Maybe there's no philosophical root. Maybe there's no methodology. It's just some things there's precision, and for other things there's not. I don't know, but
I think two possibilities. One is skepticism, that you can only get closer to any certainty by breaking down all the distinctions, finding out where the distinctions are, making sure no stone is unturned, because otherwise you can't be sure what you know. Another sense could be even the opposite, that you precision only brings you to the absolute truth, the perspective of omniscience, where once you reach the absolute truth, then you'll always know what the right answer is, no matter what. I mean, they're
Yeah,
related
that's interesting.
ideas,
Yeah.
but one is more for omniscience, the other is more for skepticism that you can know anything.
Yeah.
One is like reaching the ideal, like perfect knowledge, perfect truth, or the other one would be that you just want some kind of certainty, even though. So you put everything in terms of like questioning every single thought possible without integrating. I guess a distrust of integration. Either way, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would guess it's probably both, but more of the omniscience one. Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and you
Well.
can work through it by understanding what, well, being more trusting of what integration is. I can't really specify too much what I mean by trusting, but recognize the value of it. I think it might be a bit more on like being unsure that your integrations are actually working and doing as they should. I mean, I know I've gone through that sort of thing where I feel like I integrated it, but I'm not. I'm still questioning that I integrated it correctly. Like I'm doubting that I've successfully done it, and I'm mistrusting what I've created. Like, oh, I need to test it more, or something. Even though I don't need to, it's fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, there's probably both, right? So it's understanding what my context is when I'm asking the questions and recognizing, oh, it's this context, and then knowing. So when I'm familiar with it, then being able to go, I know it's wrong because of this and this, or if it's right because of this and this. And then the other context that I mistrust is the one I just consciously hold if I've proven it's true. That was what was I looked at the notes at what it said in the first lecture of Art of Thinking, which is interesting perspective. But yeah, I think you're right on both those. Cool. That's interesting. Um,
These questions are easy, actually. Those are
okay,
hard, but now
cool.
these are easy.
All right, let's go to the easy one. So what is a long range? Like what is considered a long range? Like beyond the day or what or
Span
human
of your
times?
entire life,
Okay.
just the span of your life.
But
Whatever.
you only know what you've done till now, right? So like you don't know you could go tomorrow, I could go tomorrow, like I don't
Right.
know. So what is when I'm thinking about how do I factor that into this view of a human timescale? Is it more like, oh, well, the average man lives till, I don't know, whatever it is, and then I just go, okay, well, that's the human time scale. That seems weird.
Well, I think the long range is more that you're thinking in terms of your entire life and you're orienting towards that long range. You might not know if you live that long, but the range of thinking is beyond the day, beyond the year, even. It's like several years down the road. I mean,
Right,
long range enough that you're not saying, like, oh, I only care about tomorrow, or
right,
I'm only looking a month ahead. We
right.
need to bring it into more, even wider than a year, just like there's actions you do and then actions that extend and without a particular end in mind. Like you
Yeah,
might pursue a career, it's long range because it can span an entire life. And even if it ended short, for whatever reason, accident even, you still need to for your consciousness to work appropriately to judge actions appropriately, at least while you are alive. You need to be able to think long range.
right. It goes, there's a couple of interesting concretizations that I'm thinking of now. So one is, remember I shared with you that, or maybe I told you the story. There was this a scene in Musashi, the book, where he decides to settle into some small village, and he's adamant on building out farmland for the next few generations. And these
Yeah.
people that had lived there previously, they were just kind of living day to day, hand to mouth. And they didn't want to care for generations because there'd be floods and there'd be issues. But because he took that perspective within, a few years, he completely transformed the whole village and they benefited then. So I think that's a good concretization of long range
Yeah.
having benefits. Although, yeah, it's not, I mean, I guess you could just broadly say beyond tomorrow for the next few years, even, or as far out as you can go, really.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is in
Okay.
contrast to any animal that I mean, they might think, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ahead for the most smartest animal, or maybe a year if you're really pushing it for like dolphins. But it's not like they're going to think about,
Really?
oh, what am I going to do in like 2 years from now? I'm really playing fast and loose with that. It's probably more like a month that they could
Well, not
store
a
it.
lot of humans don't even think for the next month, or some. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't know
Oh,
animals thought out. So
yeah.
some animals, some of us are even less advanced than animals. Then.
I mean, I mean to say like some birds can know where they put something a month from now. Like they know where to look a month later for the food they stored,
Okay. Right.
and
Right.
that's
Right.
kind of
So
where like they can
they've got some.
think a bit ahead, but they can't really foresee goals and ideas and visualize a new future or imagine a new future. That long range thinking even includes like more than just the fact that you'll be alive at some point in the future, but that you can even visualize it, think about it, conceptualize about it. Animals can't really conceptualize about the long range. They really only can deal with immediate concretes or maybe some concretes that might last a little bit of time, but nothing like they can figure out what their goal is. They can't use conceptual thought to do that. You need conceptual thought to think beyond a few months, even at a time.
Right.
And you're right, people probably don't think very complex and almost operate on an animal level, but I think most people still at least have an understanding of like they want to be happy or they want to have a relationship in the future, they want to get married. Like even basic things, they still have some range
Right.
they're looking forward to.
That's broader than an animal. Although, um, yeah, I think it's common because like just to think conceptually is so to think conceptually properly is so difficult. Here's another integration and a concretization that was from
Okay.
related. So
Yeah.
it's beyond tomorrow basically, and like it's funny. I've seen that a lot. Like even I was shopping at the supermarket, and there was a lady who was working at the counter, and the guy said to her, the guy was buying food, said she told him because it was a holiday. I can't remember. I think it was some holiday here, and she was working, and he said, "Well, don't save too much. You don't know when you're going to go. You don't want to die with your money in the grave." Something like that. So it's pretty.
Yeah.
There's something there that is common. Anyway, this practicality thing. Let's see. If what you want is success today in any field, if you demand peace, love, or any other such value now without effort or the enactment of means across time, then nothing will give it to you. And you will soon give up your goal with a sigh or a curse, as the rebels of 1960s did. Hey, that's super interesting. The rebels of 1960s. The same idea of you remember we were talking about like ayahuasca
Yeah.
and psychedelic drugs and how some
Yeah.
people like obviously there's research needs to be done and there's uses and all that, but like one common reason to do it is to get some kind of like instantaneous insight.
Yeah. Yeah. That would not be a. I mean, that was more instantaneous there. That it's wanting things to change the now. In a way, that's almost what brought them their problems, probably more than likely. I mean, a lot of people who do ayahuasca, like they have some pre-psychological thing that whether it's PTSD or whatever else, maybe certain people might want the change immediately. They don't want to do the work to fix it. They just said, "Oh, ayahuasca, I take it, that's it." But it's much deeper than that for sure.
And then this idea of going back to the rebels of the 1960s that he points out, like when you uh, I've been in a situation where like, oh, I want to change my life and I want to change it instantly, quickly, and you do something and like, but it doesn't work. And so I
Yeah,
think it's that same extreme. You see people who like just make some extreme, like what is it, a midlife crisis? Is that what it's? Yeah,
yeah,
midlife crisis, where like a guy buys this nice, the stereotype. I don't know if this is true, but stereotype is some guy buys this like nice car and like makes all these really quick changes, right?
yeah,
Isn't that the same idea where you're like you want something now, you've sucked it up for too long and now
yeah.
and so the
I think it's
rebels did
very
the same
similar.
thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the rebels he means are. There's
I don't
quite a
know.
lot there,
Yeah.
but I could think of hippies probably.
Yeah, but I'm just imagining people who like all quit
But
their
yeah,
corporate jobs and then went out and
yeah,
partied and took acids. So
yeah. I'm sure
I'm
that
making that
happened.
up. I don't know if that's true, but
Yeah.
okay.
Um,
So practicality in this usage is an invalid concept. Um,
um,
the now disease.
what does he mean practicality? I
Yeah,
almost
I'm
think
not
he
sure.
just means like, oh, don't be. I think like just be practical. Just think in the short term. You don't. It's not practical to think long range because you don't know what will happen. It's practical. Think in the now, but I'm not sure exactly what he means beyond that.
Yeah, okay. And then virtue, it doesn't, does it, it's not like virtue. So you can't get certain things instantly, but virtue does give you a certain feeling, doesn't it? Like if you're going in the right direction, you should, the virtue provides you at least the knowledge that you are making progress towards a goal
Yeah,
and you're living in some way, right? So there's,
yeah.
yeah,
It provides self-esteem for sure, and that productive purpose.
let's get rid
We
of
know
this
that's what it do.
shit.
It will provide that
Yeah,
regardless. That's the claim, at least under objectives, that the virtues do produce that. You
right.
might not necessarily get the concrete consequences, which is what you were talking about earlier, but
Yeah,
you'll at least be sure that going through this objectives and claims, you'll have self-esteem and a
right,
purpose. Those are the things you'll have. I mean,
right,
sure, you won't have the things immediately by starting to tell the truth. Say, it's not like you're immediately going to see like, oh my God, my life has changed. It's all better. It will take time because you have to build up. Even if you are living a good life, you still have to build up towards something. You have to take the steps to get there.
right. And that could be this.
Yeah, I mean, it might
It could
take
be more
even
than days. It could be
a year.
years. It could
Yeah,
be
it might be
more.
a, yeah. I mean, say if your goal was to, I don't know, just like this example, Elon Musk developing SpaceX.
Right,
Wait, that took more than a decade to get where he is now, and longer, almost like
right.
15 years even, more than
Yeah.
that. And that takes a lot of time and planning. And even if he was the best person in the universe 15 years ago with the ideal objectivist or something, he would still need to put in all that work, 15 years of work to get here. It
Yes.
wouldn't change anything. It's just he
Yeah,
just
you're
has to
right.
keep working at it.
You're right. That's interesting. And if he gave up because he might think he might not achieve it in his lifetime, well, I guess the answer to that is that Musashi example of like, yeah, if you don't think long range, even if you might not achieve it in your, no, the answer is even if you might suspect you won't even achieve it in your lifetime, so why bother? You don't know once you start enacting certain processes what you will actually achieve in your lifetime. Like maybe you will achieve some of it in your lifetime. So
Yeah, even unexpected achievements
right,
along the way. I think
yeah.
that's a big part of it.
I want to quickly